trafficking movement. I'd like to thank the Imago Dei Fund for sponsoring this event and for helping us to put this on. And I'd like to thank our two speakers today who are with us to just lead us in this time and help us understand some things that we might not even have heard of before. There is a Q&A, so you can write out any conversations or questions that you have during this, and we'll be doing that at the end of this conversation. So I'd like to introduce our speakers to you. The first is Audrey Morrissey, she's the Associate Director of My Life, My Choice, the National Survivor Leadership Director at My Life, My Choice as well too. She was the first survivor in Massachusetts to mentor commercially sexually exploited girls and has been working with My Life, My Choice since 2003. In 2008, she received the prestigious Petra Foundation Fellowship, and in 2012, she received a Boston Neighborhood Fellowship. She's been leading survivor-led programs which aim to prevent the exploitation of vulnerable girls ages 12 to 18. And Audrey, we are so truly grateful for your work, your leadership in this movement, your friendship with us, and not even just here in Massachusetts, what you're doing, but all throughout the United States. We're just so grateful for you. Our second speaker in this conversation today is Mary Speta. She's the Chief Impact Officer here at Amirah. I've had the joy of working with her now for over a year. I'm so grateful for her leadership, her thoughtfulness. She's one of the most well-read people you would ever meet, guys, I'm not gonna lie. She oversees all of our fundraising here at Amirah, communications and stewardship with her donors. She utilizes her lived experience as well as research on domestic sex trafficking, exit barriers, and laws and policies that create vulnerabilities among exploited populations. And she works to break down the myths of what sex trafficking is and is not, to inspire communities to action. So Audrey and Mary, I will let you two take it from here, and thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Steph. Hi, Audrey, welcome. Oh, I think you're muted.
Yes, I don't know why. It's probably another webinar next week, but thank God I saw your text. I'm like in vacation mode, so I almost forgot, and I wouldn't want to miss this for the world. I'm so excited to be here and just to be a part of this conversation. It's always an honor to be a part of any conversation that will combat trafficking of children and adult women.
Yeah, well, and I am so grateful that you're here and to have this conversation with me. And you know, we are huge fans of your work at My Life, My Choice. For anyone who's not familiar with My Life, My Choice, or the work that you do, can you just share a little bit about that?
Sure. So My Life, My Choice has been around for quite some time. And how we came about was due to the death of a young woman who was in a DCF-funded group home. And it was after her murder that it was revealed that this young person had a history of exploitation. And to this day, her murder has not been solved. What law enforcement believes is that either an exploiter or a buyer killed her. And it was at that time, a friend of mine who was a survivor asked me to come to kind of share my experience in the life at their My Life, My Choice first training on commercial sexual exploitation of children. And so that's kind of where I got started. And then from there, I was brought on and we trained all of the DCF workers. We also have a 10-week prevention curriculum, which is used in group homes. And to date, our curriculum is being used in 32 states across the country around the, to prevent youth from being recruited into the commercial sex industry. And then around 2004, I founded our mentoring program. I'm the first survivor in the Massachusetts area to mentor that population of young people. I have to say today we have about 16 mentors, adult women who mentor this population. We take referrals under the age of 18. We don't close cases. We don't even call them cases when they turn 18. We continue to see them as long as they need our services. Referrals might change as they get, as they come into adulthood. Some of the referrals we have to make might be for adult services, But in a nutshell, we train on commercial sexual exploitation of children. We have our prevention solution model and our mentoring program. So we do a lot of everything. And for me, the most important work for me is to continue to connect with the young people who have lived this, who've had this experience, and to help them to get out and to see and to find and to know that there's another way to live.
That's amazing work that you're doing and so important. And so today we're talking about racism and sex trafficking. And for everyone who's watching, I want to just give us a few definitions of, how we're going to talk about things, set the stage. So when we talk about sex trafficking today, we're really talking about all forms of sexual exploitation. So that means, brothels, street prostitution, escort services, sugaring, strip clubs, survival sex, pretty much any way in which someone is dehumanized and then objectified sexually. So that's how we're using that term. And we're talking about it in the United States. Because when we're talking about systemic racism, we can draw a direct line through much of US history to where we got today, with so many women and girls, especially women and girls of color, being targeted for sexual exploitation. In fact, the majority of women and girls who are being sexually exploited right now are women and girls of color. And so when we talk about like the life of exploitation, there's this kind of arc, and there's three major moments on that arc. There's entry, there's the exploitation itself, and then exit. And what Audrey and I are going to do is break down those three moments on the arc and talk about how systemic racism plays into them. So we're going to hop right in with entry into the life. And we use the word, I think, vulnerability a lot, and it's kind of become almost a buzzword to talk about how women and girls get into the life of exploitation. But for anyone who's not experienced it, there's a very little concept of the depth of vulnerability that we're talking about here. Before we hopped on here, Audrey and I identified some key vulnerabilities that we're gonna break down for you. And we're not in any way, shape, or form saying that white women and girls don't experience these things, but we are talking about how women and girls of color experience these things far more and to a deeper extent. So we're talking about poverty, incarceration, foster care and group homes, and hypersexualized perceptions of women and girls of color. So Audrey, why don't we start with poverty? Can you talk to us about how, what does poverty actually look like? What kind of poverty are we talking about here?
Well, we're just talking about a lot of the young people that we serve. First of all, they're coming from a one parent home, and a mom who's struggling. Sometimes, in most cases, might not be employed, but if they are employed, really fall under a very, very low income. They're usually in a form of public housing, Section 8 housing, and we're looking at a population of young people who don't have the privileges of a lot of the young people that some of the folks might be listening in now, right? That your children probably couldn't even imagine, right? Couldn't imagine like where that next meal is going to come from. Lower levels of education, not the best school systems, and those things make them very, very vulnerable, because even though our children are living in poverty, they do see people who are not, right? And so when they see that, right, and as a young person, right, they still want like those latest sneakers, their nails done, their hair done, like all of those, right? A young girl in particular, right? Still into fashion, still want to look nice, but mom, right, can't provide those things. But those things look shiny and attractive to them.
And all the cool kids have them, and
All the
normally
cool kids have
friends.
them, all their friends, right? And
Yeah.
and when you think of someone feeling like they don't fit in, right, and that they're
Mhm.
not accepted, that really sets that's what kind of turns that poverty into vulnerability, right? That makes them
Mhm.
so vulnerable for when that exploiter comes along.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned right at the beginning that a lot of these youths are coming from one-parent homes, usually struggling single moms. And I brought some statistics today because I love to bring some statistics to bring reality. But one of those things is that one in three Black men will be arrested at some point in their lives in the United States. So, I think it's easy to like leave that statistic there and say just one in three men. But what I'm thinking is like one in three families have lost a father, have lost a brother, have lost an uncle, have lost a grandfather. That support system. That kind of leads us into incarceration, the second vulnerability that we were talking about, and how that really breaks up family systems. Is that something that you're seeing a lot with the youth, particularly that you're working with?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you said it. And a lot of men of color are doing time for nonviolent crimes. I know particularly how we're, what's happening in light of what we see today. Like people, most people believe, God, if they're in jail, they must have done something violent. And that is
Mm-hmm.
not the case.
Mm-hmm.
Systems have, I mean, listen, those institutions are businesses, right? And like any other business, in order to profit, right, you
Yeah.
have to have customers, so to say. You're right. And
Yeah.
so you have to fill those beds in order for
Mm-hmm.
that business to be successful and to profit. And so our
Mm-hmm.
systems are set up that our men of color don't stand a chance. I mean, we've watched, like, even on the news, like, you can't, I give an example. One of the things that was on the news, um, and I believe it was Southborough. Um, so a white male goes into a police station, right? Stabs an officer and gets arrested with nothing happened. I mean, a legit threat. Every officer in that police station could have shot him, right? He could have been riddled with bullets, but he was
Mm-hmm.
a white male. How does a white male go into a police station, stab a police officer, and make it out alive,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we see what's happening in our society today. Our Black men are getting killed before even being proven innocent or guilty, right? So even the arrest process is horrific, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that plays a huge part in our families being torn apart, which also leads me into, if the kids are not in that single parent home, they're in our systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our
Yeah.
systems go into homes of color, and for reasons that are, example, mom's working hard. She gets up every morning. She makes sure her teenage daughter is up, dressed. Mom sends her to school. Mom leaves for work. But the young person might play hooky and be in a problem. And then the teachers call the Department of Children and Families and say that this mother is neglectful, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then the child of color is being removed from the home, when the reality is this mom is trying to put food on the table, has made sure this young person, right, has the
Mm-hmm.
intentions, and then label an unfit mom. And then systems are dictating to her how to raise her children. And then our kids end up in those systems. And when they get in those systems, they're exposed to other kids who already have a history of exploitation, right? Who
Mm-hmm.
then, through those systems, our kids of color are lured out by other kids, right? And brought to exploiters. It is such uh, it is a cycle a vicious cycle that breaks my heart, and it is something that I see over and over and over again. It's not
Mm-hmm.
unique. It is one of the most one of the things that we see the most, that even systems go into Black homes and tear families apart. And then that makes that young person vulnerable as well.
Absolutely. And to contrast that statistic, for anyone who's not familiar with it, that 1 in 3 Black men will be arrested in their lifetime. For white men, it's 1 in 17. That's a big difference. And, you know, when you're talking about going in, breaking up homes, breaking up families, we got to talk about foster care, of course, and group homes. Can you tell us about that? But particularly, I mean, when we're talking about these vulnerabilities here, when we think about grooming, that pimps and traffickers, you know, groom their victims to be victimized, can we just say that for a minute that like the systems are really doing it for them?
We had a young person who, she kind of made a statement. Basically, she felt that the foster parents were just getting paid, right? And so for her, she didn't see anything with her exploiter making money, right? She felt that at least he told me he loved me, right? The foster family didn't. And I tell you, this is interesting you brought that up. Our children of color are less likely to be adopted by families, right? Less like, right? And it's so interesting you said that. I was watching the news, and although I was happy this morning watching the news, and I seen a little young white girl, and she seemed to have some special needs, right? And I mean, I was happy that the family adopted her, but I could not help but realize that she's not going to be an easy child for this family. But when you take a kid of, I actually said it to my daughter, a kid of color who might not even have disabilities, right? That could be successful. No one's willing to adopt them, right? So they're bouncing from foster home to foster home, and then they're going in these homes, and here is what's happening. To your point, they're being molested at high rates, right? Because they're in these homes, and people are just collecting a check. And so the grooming process starts by the molesters, right? And sometimes it starts with, I'll give you this, don't say anything, right?
Yeah.
And so what ends up happening is that what this young person is taught is that my only value is in my body. So when they meet their first exploiter, it's quite easy for him to say, well, wait, you can make some money. We can really make some money. Those people were taking advantage of you for nothing, or, right? Or he only gave you that amount of money, right? You don't deserve that. You could be really making big money. And so our foster care systems, a lot of the homes, they're not, that particularly when you're placing our teenage girls in these homes, you know, there are people in and out of these homes, and I don't feel that these homes are really being looked at on the level that they should be. And our foster care system are not making random checks, right, in these homes. So by the time they do find out what's going on, or the kid's too afraid, sometimes too afraid, the damage has been done. And so that sets our children up in a way that can you imagine, like, being groomed in a way, and you're supposed to be safe in our systems, that sets you up. The bottom line for someone, makes it easier for a predator to sell you. That's just the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so glad you touched on the sexual abuse thing, because I mean, we know the majority across the board, women and girls who are exploited, the majority of them were sexually abused as children. And it disrupts that belief system that, you know, like you said, my only worth is my body. I'm an object to be used. And if I can use that to get the things that I need, basic needs, food, housing, clothes, attract a guy who's going to keep me safe, that's exactly what's going to happen.
You've laid it out perfectly. That's just the way you said it is just how it works. And when you think of someone like, here's the thing that's really heartfelt and has broke my heart over and over again when I built relationships with these young people. My own family doesn't want me, right? And so when someone else shows an interest, right? Because the bottom line, they're looking for love in all the wrong places. And for whatever reason, if you feel like your family doesn't want you, we all desire for someone to love us. And it's not, the search is not a sexual search all the time, right? It's just someone to love me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what our vulnerable young kids in systems are looking for. Like, so when you're searching for something and then it appears, right? You
Mm-hmm.
approach that like, oh my God, my dream has come true, particularly if he can provide food, shelter, get my nails done, buy me a cell phone, right? All those things that I can't have. It's very easy for a vulnerable population to be attracted to that. Even when the abuse comes, what's really sad is that then that turns, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that to him. That was my fault. He's good to me, right? I even see them blaming themselves when the abuse happens as well in the exploitation. And that's another thing with girls of color versus, and not minimizing this with any person who's had this experience, but the abuse for girls of color and trans women of color and trans kids of color is on a higher level than a white person that might be exploited. The abuse is even, it's just on a much deeper level than which they experience. And again, I don't want to minimize their experience because white girls and white women get beat up, raped, robbed as well. But a girl of color gets abused probably 5 to 6 times more so than a white girl who would be in the life.
Yeah, and that is a great segue to talk about the last vulnerability we really wanted to hit on, which was the hypersexualization, that hypersexualized perception of particularly girls of color. You know, like I think it was George Washington Law School that came out with the report Girlhood Interrupted, and they show in there how girls of color are consistently perceived to be older than they are by like 5 or 6 years. You know, not just like a couple years. That's a big gap there. And then also just, you know, perceived. And I mean, we think about perceptions as well. This is not something that we talk about, you know, all the time. It's not like everybody's getting together and having an intense discussion about how, you know, girls and women of color are more sexual than white. That's not how this plays out. It's you see a white girl and a black girl walking down the street in the exact same outfit. Yes. And it's the different reaction to both of them.
Oh, absolutely. And some of that, right? Because, you know, girls of color a lot of times develop quicker, right? And we just do for some reason have a different body shape. We just do, right? A different body type. And, you know, people like to stereotype, you know, big boobs, big booty, you know, right? All that stuff. But one of the things that I want to say about that, and I really want people to understand, first of all, that is not true. I'm going to before I even go to what happens being in the life, even before that young person gets into the life, due to the sexual abuse that she has endured, because again, you touched on it, it's the same basically the same statistic as the teenage mom, as a history of sexual abuse. Yep. From all of that abuse, that young person sexually is really the opposite. Like they really hate sex, right?
Yeah.
They, how sex was introduced to them, how they were introduced to sex was not in a unconditional, loving way. It was either taken from them, right? It was forced sex, right? And so when you think of someone who has to, in a sense, just lay there and take it, right? It doesn't mean they like it. Let me tell you something. I have girls who have been over the years in my prevention group, right? Who've never had the experience of exploitation, but sexual abuse, right? They're in systems.
Mhm.
And I've had girls from 16 to 18 years old say to me, I don't like having sex. I actually hate sex, right?
Mhm.
Give you an example. I think of a young lady, right? And you know how we're always, for those, well, I work with young people, so we're always like, you got to use condoms, right? And we're trying to educate them.
Right. Yeah.
And because of their sexual abuse, one of the things that they cannot say, even when they think in their mind, like they're 16 and up, right? And they think,
Mhm.
okay, I'm consenting to have sex with this person.
Yeah.
You have these, they don't even know how to say, you need to wear a condom before you have sex with me. Not because they don't know any better, but because they've lost their voice when it comes
Yeah.
to sexual experiences. And
Mhm.
one of the things too, I really want people to understand this, and I'm going to make this really personal. When a young, and I like to think when I was a younger woman, I mean, I still think, today I'm in vacation mode, but I still kind of think, for 57, I think I'm a little cutie. And I
Yeah.
do think when people see me, I do present as a, not overly sexualized, but I think I'm kind of a sexy chick when I put myself together, right? And so,
Yeah.
I think that, and that this has been my experience, that, in other men's, like when men are coming on to me, that's what they might see. But
Mhm.
because of being the sexual abuse, being in the life, having to sleep with strangers that I didn't even know from a teenage girl, I had to, what you have to do, give example, when I came into recovery, when I got clean, in my first sexual experience after I got clean, I hated it. I thought I was like this sexual being. I thought, when I was in the life, I made money, all this stuff. Later
Yeah.
to find out through doing the work that I suffered from dissociative disorder, and where my
Mhm.
dissociative disorder plays out to this day. And I have been out of the life in recovery for over 27 years. And I
Mhm.
have to tell you people, I have recovered from a whole lot. Believe me, I've recovered from a whole lot. But the one thing that has not changed for me is my body, the dissociative disorder during sex. And I got clean when I was 30. And I was a cutie pie, had no problem getting a man, none of that. But when it came to that sexual experience, my body, from the trauma of having to sleep with stranger after stranger, and you better find a way to cope with that. At first, I was able to do it on my own. And then through being in the life for so many years, then substance abuse became a way to numb me. This is something that I will never recover from. There's no amount of therapy, a sex, it's like a foreign object. Like my body, it feels nothing,
Mhm.
nothing. And that is the saddest piece of trauma for me that I've brought out of the life. So when we're over sexualizing and thinking, oh, because people used to say things like, oh, she's, what's the word they use for when they like to have promiscuous? Oh
Mhm.
my God. It is like total opposite. It's an automatic thing. People take sex from me all the time. No sense in fighting. Just let them have it. And when the
Yeah.
exploiter says you can make money, well, maybe that might be a step up. At least I'm, whether he's taking it, but at least I'm getting something where before I
Mhm.
got nothing. But that numbness and that emptiness is still there. No one can sleep with a bunch of strangers they don't know over and over again and it not cause trauma. So that is one of the biggest myths you'd ever hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about it a bit, so let's go into talking about the life being exploited, the life. And we had talked about offline some of the stuff where women and girls of color have heavily racist experiences in the life, between fetishes, violent fantasies, and the money issue too. And of course, for all you're watching, we're not trying to traumatize you here, but rather paint a picture of reality of what's actually happening.
Yes. So first of all, I want to be clear. White girls, listen, I'm re-traumatized, brought up in Boston, got here when I was 6 years old, right? Boston was one of the most racist northern states in the country, right? I lived through all kinds of racism, busing, all of that. Even in the life, I remember working in the peep shows. And so in this place, they call them rap booths. Like, you go on one side, guy go on the other side. There's a glass in the middle, and you dance around, strip. He puts money in the hole. Yeah. I remember my being in there, and I remember like the owner of the place had little spies that would kind of walk through and then go tell him, for instance, there's a black girl in the front booth, because there were two booths that were right in the front. And he would call and say, get those black bitches out of that front booth. I want white girls in those front booths at all times, right? In the strip clubs, because he owned that and quite a few of the strip clubs. The black girls were more used to put the white girls up to be pretty, but even in the strip clubs, use the black girls to do hand jobs and right? Let them work the bar and hustle drinks and do all that other stuff, and let the white girls be pretty, make more money, right? So if a white girl, if I was standing, I could, plenty of white girls, I know I was more attractive than they were, right? The bottom line is they might give her $200 and only offer me 50, right? I have to say, being on the track in the combat zone, I remember buyers would ride around and they would say things like, any white girls around, right? Because they would prefer to buy. The racism was so real and upfront. A friend of mine, and even by law enforcement, girls of color are abused more by law enforcement than white girls are. I remember the first car I ever got in was a white detective. He immediately flashed me his badge and told me I had to give him a blowjob or he was going to arrest me. I was a kid. That was the first night I was put on a street corner. That was the first car I got in. That was my first introduction to being in the life, right? I remember there was some experience where law enforcement might even pay a white girl, right? Pay her. But the black girl had to do him to keep from going to jail, right? A dear friend of mine shared with me, gorgeous girl and white girl, and I'll never forget her sharing with me. She said, Audrey, she said, one night, me and a black girl got picked up. She said, the cop said to the both of them, he had them both in the back seat, white officer says to the black girl, I know why you're out here, but then said to her, but I don't know why you're out here. Now get out of here and go home. You know what I mean? And arrested the girl of color. And so that's another thing. Girls of color are arrested at a much higher rate than white girls are, a much, much higher rate. And again, even in the life, there's just a different, the experience of both of them are so different, right? Around the abuse, around the arrests. And so the racism plays out in such a deep level. I mean, you're already doing something that doesn't enhance your esteem, right? I remember a buyer said to me one time, he said, nobody will ever, he said, nobody will ever marry you. you know, and I laugh about it now and say, I wish I could find him now, because I've had 2 husbands and damn it, I don't want another one. You know what I'm saying? You know, but, you know, another example is that a young lady I work with, I remember saying to her, gorgeous white girl, and I remember saying to her, you know, that she had to be more careful, because another thing, most buyers are the majority of buyers are upper middle class white men, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're more likely to just use and abuse a black girl. But a white girl, I know that sometimes they'll become a little more obsessed and try and kind of mold her into, like, he might even take her to, if he's, you know, if he's not married, he might take her to his company holiday party, buy her a pretty dress and dress her up and have her on his arm. Versus a black girl, you're only worth buying in secrecy. I can give you less money and keep it pushing. So it's sad, and that has not changed from when I was in the life, and the different young people that I talk to today, that I have open, honest conversations with, who kind of share their experiences.
Yeah. And I mean, and you talked about this a little bit with the money, but I wrote it down because I wanted to, like, not head away from this, but you said, like, difference is, like, a white woman was offered $200, you were offered $50. And while this was, you know, almost 30 years ago, this is still true today, right?
Still.
Black,
Still.
you know, women and girls of color have to have sex. I've heard you say it before, and you say it better than I do, so I'm going to give it to you, actually.
What did I remind?
They have to sleep with 3 strangers.
All right.
Three strangers.
Oh yeah, a white girl might have to turn 3 tricks. Meanwhile, I'll have to turn 10, and she'll still have more money than me, even today. Today, which leads me into, right, and it's traumatic for all of us, because again, I'm not limiting anyone's trauma, but there is, being a woman of color, I know I've had to have sex with more strangers than a white girl. And a white girl, too, is more likely to have a lot of repeat customers, right? Which a girl of color is not, right? So they're definitely, most times, they're not, and not saying I never had repeats, I did, but not on the level of, it goes to what I said. For the white girl, he can, in his fantasy, she's my girlfriend, and even showing her a deeper, right, level of respect. I give you another example too. Me being a light-skinned woman of color, one of the things that I noticed being in the life, a lot of times, if buyers couldn't find a white girl, they take me. You know what I'm saying? Because they felt that because I was lighter, I might not rob them, right? And so I seen the racism being played out in that way too, where they ride up on me, and any white girls, and I'll go, no, well, I'll take you. And again, a white girl, he might just want a blowjob from her, but the black girl has to do everything for the least amount of money, right?
Yeah, less money.
Because I gotta use you, like I'm not gonna work her that way, but I gotta get my money's worth. You know what I'm saying? So, and so for me, when I think of all that's going on today, in my life, this stuff it takes me back to that, because I've endured racism in the state of Massachusetts. I got here when I was 6 years old from a little girl, and I faced racism in my healthy life and in my unhealthy life, right? Racism always played out in my life. It doesn't matter what lifestyle I was leading at the time. The color of my skin always played a role in how I was treated.
And I want to now talk about exit, and what that looks like. And again, I'm going to bring us a healthy dose of reality here. You know, it's really hard to get data and facts and statistics on sexual exploitation because it's such an underground system. And I mean, it's not like, you know, all of us raise our hands and like, me, I'm being sexually exploited, come ask me questions. That's not really how that works.
No.
But we know from the FBI that a rough estimate of how many victims actually exit the life is about 1%, which is shockingly low. And remember, the majority of those who are being victimized are women and girls of color. So that 99% that's not making it out, it's majority women and girls of color. And so when we talk about exit, systemic racism builds extra barriers to exit for women and girls of color. And you talked about law enforcement. You talked about the perspective there, right? The white woman is a victim, but the Black woman is a prostitute.
Yes.
And then I also want to talk about like the excessive charges, where there's harsher sentences for women and girls of color than there are for white women. You know, I think of like Centoya Brown and Crystal Kaiser, who thankfully, you know, their stories have, you know, happier endings, but happier endings at most.
At what cost, though? At what cost, right? At what cost, right? And it's so true. And to this day, I mean, in Massachusetts, we don't arrest and charge children, right? So that's been stopped that years ago. But to this day, you can go to Framingham State Prison and women are doing years. And the only thing that's on their record for most of them, a lot of them are just prostitution charges. Again, nonviolent crimes, right? And the other thing I want to say about exiting too, what makes it hard for women of color, because it's such a hard road for them. If we don't grab them when they're first get in, right, particularly our children, what ends up happening is you find yourself in a place where you kind of give up and say, there's no way out for me. Then what ends up happening, what keeps a lot of those women stuck, is that then the substance abuse, right? Because, right, and then people look at them like, oh, they're just a drug addict selling themselves for small amounts of money. They didn't start off like that, right? We do have some women who maybe, there are adult women who are in the life due to a substance abuse issue, and that's the only reason why they're in it, right? But even that, arresting them with but substance abuse is a huge one that keeps women of color stuck in the life, because now they have this other heavy weight on their back, right? Let's talk about treatment facilities. You know, when I grew up in my community, there were a couple of treatment facilities, bottom line, in the hood, right? Can I tell you right now today, those facilities, and I believe any addict deserves treatment, believe me, but can I tell you the treatment facilities that are in Roxbury, Dorchester, there's probably only a 1% woman of color in that facility. Why? Because the white addicts, their parents have insurance, right? And it's about money. And so this woman of color who cannot escape getting out of the life, who's in and out of prisons and suffering from substance abuse, why is it she can't even get treatment in her own community? And I'm talking facilities that were built in those particular communities for people of color. And now they can't even get fed. And when we really look at the big picture, when we talk about racism, right? We didn't even look at addiction until white kids started ODing, right? And then when we look at that population, so the white people with money, they don't want treatment facilities in their neighborhoods, right? So we'll pay big money, keep that, and I'm, because I get angry when I think about that. keep that shit over in Roxbury and Dorchester. We got money. We'll just pay big money, save the beds for them, right? So even substance abuse wasn't looked at, and money is not put into treatment for women and girls in the life, right? Because due to the trauma that they've endured, substances, because I always say for me, if it weren't for substances, I would probably be in a psych ward. In some sense, even though I'm an addict, and there's a piece where substances saved my life, right? Meaning my mind, my body was gone. It's already destroyed that, but it would have took my mind. You know what I'm saying? And so it makes it difficult. The other thing that I look at too, a lot of when women come out of the life and due to this horrific record, like they committed murders, right? They can only get jobs at McDonald's, right? These shit jobs that they get. And, but a white girl who made it out, right? She's gonna get a better shot. We can kind of sweep her. She can do an interview. We really like you, you know. And what people don't understand, it's up to the employer. The employer, no matter what your Corey looks like, an employer can still hire you. It's not, they're not told, right? And so that's what makes it hard for girls and women to get out of the life as well. Some have tried, but then the hand is dealt housing, education, right? Everything's a freaking problem. Everything, right? When you know they don't have anything and you know where they came from. And I'm talking intelligent, bright women, and women of color do not get the same opportunities around treatment, education, housing. They were just talking about that too this morning. I'm in Maine, but I was looking at the news in Boston, and they really did like some tests, right, on housing. And they talked about how, you know, people of color are being discriminated against for housing, you know, because they might have, even if they have like Section 8 or, right? And even that's a huge one because due to their record, their Corey, right, of exploitation, and some of them can't even get a Section 8 voucher. You know what I'm saying? So it's hard now because there's no freaking opportunities. And so for a lot, the exploiter might have been long gone. And like you said, now it's a game of survival. This is the only way I can eat. This is the only way I can feed my kids because society won't give me a break. You know, it reminds me of when I heard George Floyd, and when I watched his funeral, and I heard the pastor say, like, get your knee off our necks, man. Your knees on our necks for people of color for hundreds of years. Get your goddamn knee off our neck. We're capable of doing the same things that you can do, but with the knee on the neck, we keep getting held down. You know what I'm saying? And to be exploited is already a shameful, horrific thing. Like my esteem was already low. And then when I try to do the right thing, you kick me down some more, won't give me a shot. It's horrible. It's sad. And it's the reality. It's the reality.
And that's why we call it the cycle, right? It's not just an arc. It's not like you enter, you live the life, you exit, you move on. There is a cycle. It's this constant entry, live the life, try to exit, but then there aren't any services, so going back in. And then we have to think about the next generation as well. You know, you talked about those communities, Roxbury, Dorchester. Well, you know, why do we think of those as communities of color? Because of redlining, because decades ago, like those were set up, Boston segregated, those were set up to be communities of color, and it was put all of them in there. And as long as they stay in there, they're gonna keep cycling.
They keep cycling, and it's so true. And even in that too, right? But then when we look at the power, you know, and I like to call it white power, right? If you notice, now we notice we're too far in the suburbs. Our offices are in Boston, right? So now we want that back, right? So it right? So even a lot of people of color who have made it out, right? Who are trying to own something, who have gotten a little something. The bottom line, if white people want to come take it, they come and take it. They take what they want, right? And you're like, And how they're doing that is that you can't afford the rent. Who can afford, right? So even if my little esteem has, I got a decent job, right? And I'm happy with my job and I'm feeling secure in the money I make at my job, but it's still not enough because, right?
Yep.
We want this area back. And so what we'll do, we'll make the rent so high that you can't, even with your little job that you think is good, right? Again, another kick to my self-esteem, because now I can't afford to live in the community that you all set up for me, right? So it's so sad. It's so sad.
Well, so I want to be conscious of our time, and for those of you watching, thank you for staying with us through this and hearing these difficult things. And if you are a white person, I just want you to know that we don't want you to walk away feeling like there is no hope, because it is up to all of us to offer hope, to be doing something. And this is not just a one and done conversation. We want you to be involved in both of our organizations, in the movement that's going on. So I'm going to give you a couple of next steps, and then if there's questions, Stephanie is going to come on and feed them to us. So the first thing is, and I hope that this was already made clear, but the fight to end systemic racism and the fight to end sexual exploitation are not separate. These are 100% linked. In fact, the first time that sex trafficking was ever written into law, it was in the early 1900s, and it was called white slavery. So the movement that we have inherited actually was birthed out of systemic racism. So please know that. The second thing that I want you to do, I want to challenge you to challenge your own perceptions. We talked about that hypersexualized perception of women and girls of color, and I think that that's something that all of us right now, no matter where we come from, we can be checking that in ourselves. And that's some internal work that we can do. And then Audrey and I really want you to know about the equality model. And Audrey, I love it when you talk about the equality model. So can you tell us a little bit about that and specifically how that's going to help?
Here's what I want people to be, there's one thing I want to say too. Although we're talking about women of color, because sometimes white people can say that's happening over there and not in my community, I want to be real clear. The other 20% are not women of color. So your children are at risk as well. Anybody's at risk for exploitation. And so when we talk about the equality model, I want you guys to be real clear what that means. We need to stop, again, in Massachusetts, we no longer arrest and charge children, but we need to stop arresting adult women as well and charging them with prostitution. What we need to do, people get these things confused, the equality model and then the full decrim. So some of you all are listening might be like, oh, those poor brown people, let's do a full decrim. Let me tell you the difference. The equality model just means the victims of this life not get arrested, whether it's children or adults. What the full decrim means is that you decriminalize pimping. That means you make it legal for exploiters to exploit women and children. You also brothels. And again, unlike the detoxes that I told you about that are in the hood, let me be real clear what will happen in a full decrim. This is a multi-billion, not million, billion-dollar industry, right? So if you're a white person who got a lot of money, and I ain't mad if you do, right? But the bottom line is this: a multi-billion-dollar industry means if you vote for a full decrim of prostitution, that means these people have enough money to buy the house right next door to you in your suburban neighborhood. There'll be nothing you can do about it. They have, some of them that have more money than you have. They can open a brothel right next door to you. And I always like to say this to people with money who think full decrim, so I can scare their asses, because the mere thought, if that's the only thing that scares you, I'm down to scare you, is that a brothel can open next door to me. They have the means and the money to do that, right? So you can sell people. It gives and let's be real clear, all men don't buy sex. but the majority are upper middle are upper middle class white men married with a family, right? And what will happen with a full decrim? If this many people buy sex now, men buy sex now, a full decrim will open up the demand. So it'll go from here to here, right? And this conversation that we've just had with you today, for you to see it for what it really is, the racism, who do you think's gonna fill that demand? It's gonna be brown children, brown women who do not have a choice. And if some of you have heard from the women, the white women who are saying it's our right to sell our bodies, first of all, the trauma that I've endured, I didn't experience that until I came out of the life. You don't know you're traumatized until you come out, number one. But what I want to be real clear, and I really want you to understand, those women have a choice. They're usually upper middle class white women with a college education who do have a choice. A full decrim, though, is going to increase the sale of children of color and brown women, adult women of color who do not have a choice. So do not be fooled by this. And those of us of color, we, back in slavery days, right, when the slave owners would go and take sex and rape the slave women, like we've had enough of that. So please, I encourage you to don't be a part of the problem, because full decrim will make you a part of the problem. Be a part of the solution, because any person who exploits a human being should be prosecuted. Anybody who buys people should go to jail as well. We want to help the girls and the women, whether they're of color or not. That's our fight. The equality models. Stop arresting for a nonviolent crime on their end, but they're the ones, the violence is happening to them. The rapes and all that are coming from the buyers, and the abuse are coming from the exploiters, and they need to be held accountable. So that's the difference between the two models.
Yeah. And we're going to send you all a link to a website, equalitymodel.us.org. It's a group of people organizing to get this model, partial decriminalization, adopted in all 50 states. We're going to send that to you so you can be on their email updates and be active in Massachusetts. So Stephanie's back, and if we have any questions, we'll answer them.
Yes, and so I want to say to all the participants, we're over time, so if you need to go, we're going to be continuing to record this. We're going to send out the link later, so you could also just forego whatever plans you had and continue to listen to. So we're all for that. So Audrey, Mary, this has been amazing. I think one of the questions that was asked, and then one that I wrote down for myself, we hear the term, I mean, this problem is massive. It's massive. It's beyond the scope of our understanding. And a lot of times, and I'm speaking, as a white woman, the white community that I grew up in, we were like, well, we can tackle this. We got this, and we try to take over, and we develop what is called the white savior complex. And so one of the questions that was asked is, what is the best way to help the most vulnerable to exploitation? And then I wrote down, how do we do this in a way that we're not becoming white saviors? Because I go to all these anti-trafficking meetings, and I spoke with another person in this movement, and we see a lot of white women around the table at these meetings. And not that there is something, there's not something wrong with that, but there is something wrong with that. So how do we welcome, invite, and how do we make sure that we're not just barreling in, if that makes sense?
Well, you said something, the key word is invite, and not that a lot of the people that are listening in know survivors, but those women, white women who do know survivors, you have to invite them to the table. How do you not become a savior is to talk to the women of color, ask them what they need, what needs to happen, right? And it's this thing of put your money where your mouth is. You know what I'm saying? The bottom line, everybody's not gonna be, who's listening in, it's not gonna be on Front Street, right? But there are some people, we all have different roles that we play. some people, their role is, I'm just going to support an agency. I'm gonna like your agency, right? You house women, and so how do I instead of just talking and being this savior, right? Sometimes you just stay in the background and write a check. The bottom line is invite more survivors to the table so that you can ask them what they need from you, and stop thinking you have the answers, right? Ask them what they need. I mean, even the folks, and I'm sure some of your supporters are supporting this webinar today. You have actual adult women, right, that could put something together saying what it is that they need, right? Like equal housing, making sure you have the right, if you have political connections in your community, putting the right people in place, calling your congressmen to make change. Don't vote for this nonsense, right? We have to stand together and be on the same page, but in order to help, you have to know what it is that people need from you. Because I think too, sometimes people just think they know what you need, right? And it causes more harm than good. And I'm learning that in what's going on now, even at my job, right? We're starting to look at the different things, and where some like white women are crying, you have no, stop it. Stop, cut it out. You're not right. It's not your time to cry. You know what I mean? And not be victim. What can you do to help? And talk to people. I'd be glad to talk to people. I don't, there's a lot of us around who don't have any problem sitting down, letting you know what it is that's needed. Yeah. And it's not a hard task. It's not hard.
Yeah. I think the word there is invite and listen, and then find out what's needed.
That's it.
Rather than come to the table, say, I'm going to offer this, when that's really not what's needed at all.
Yeah.
And follow through.
Yeah, and follow through. One of the things that I've noticed, like in a lot of the protests, I'm looking and I'm like, shit, the majority of them are white and they're marching their butts off. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm like, shh, you know what I mean? Like, damn, they've outnumbered. To me, they're not, oh, I'm a victim. They're standing in something that's wrong, and they're putting themselves out there. Because remember, in the 60s, you would call an in-lover, right? Even though white people did march back then, but you could get killed. So I'm noticing now those numbers have risen, and white people are standing up for justice. So in this, stand up for justice, because the reality is, in a society that we live in, you guys are the best allies we can have, women of color, right? Because who's gonna listen to white people? Are gonna listen to white people more quicker than they're gonna listen to me, right? So just find out what your position is, because you are in a unique position, but listen to learn, and learn to listen, and then apply the action that's needed after you do those things.
Yeah. Another great question that was asked, and this I think will help to unveil what we're talking about when we talk about systemic racism. So a question was asked was, in Massachusetts, what are the laws to criminalize the buyers in the process of exploitation, and do they usually stick in a court of law? And
no.
So you said earlier, though, the average buyer is a 40-year-old white man. Mm-hmm. So are there any laws to criminalize these 40-year-old white men? And how come all the girls and women of color are ending up in prison instead?
Mm-hmm. There are laws in place, but are they enforced? No. And let me tell you why. I want to be real clear. And it's not, although now we do have some bad law enforcement, but here's how I look at this particular crime. It's more, for me, I believe, when they do stings, because there's legit stings where rooms are monitored, they see the transaction, right? But if you have an upper middle class white male that's in that sting, the officer is another upper middle class white man, right? So I think what they do, they look at that as their peers. They'll say something like, what are you doing with her? Get out of here, go home to your wife and kids, right? So is this responsibility to my peer, right? And the woman of color is the problem. You know what I'm saying? What are you doing with her? Like, I've even seen things where law enforcement would give him his money back. Like, even after he's bought you and you've done the act, right? Or you're in the middle, right? And cops pull up. I've been in them situations. How much money did you give her? Right? And after he's done with, right, having to give him his money back, and then he's to go. And so those laws are not being enforced. And it because again, you're a white male, and we already know who holds the most power is an upper middle class white male. He holds more power than an upper middle class white woman, right? And so that's how he's looked at. Like, he's the victim, right? And like, this woman went out and searched for him when he's the one who went on the website, looked at folk, right? He's the one who made the effort to go on these sites, pick who he wants to buy. You know what I'm saying? She didn't come looking for him. The exploited don't, right? And it's the racism thing. It's the power of the white male. And let's not damage your record. She's just a prostitute. Who cares about her record?
Right. Right. And the cases of that are beyond the scope.
All the time.
So there's more work to be done on that, and maybe a future march on our part for that, because there's too many.
Yeah.
Happening.
And can I say this too? I'm sure you're familiar with demand abolition.
Yeah.
So I worked with them years ago, and so we were talking about what's the best way to handle the demand. And so one of the things that came up in conversation was shaming them, putting their name in the paper, picture, blah, blah, blah. The men in the room were for shaming. The white men, the men were for shaming. It was the women who weren't for shaming. Why? Because that could possibly be my husband. I get why, right? And so from that upper middle class white woman, it's more, they know it's wrong, but it's that fear of, oh my God, what if?
Right, because then I become a single parent, and how am I going to deal with? Yeah,
and the embarrassment that might. It's not about helping the, and that's another thing we have to get away from in the power that you have. There has to be a level of humility, and it's not about you. It's about the freedom of others, right? And if helping to free others cause you some shame and embarrassment, it passes. It passes. And for me, it's still worth the fight if I've helped someone.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one last question, and then we'll just talk briefly about where everybody can go after this. So we have a teacher that she's just wondering, she's done a lot of research on looking up signs, and things to try to identify, but she would really just love to hear from your perspective. She teaches primarily between the ages of 10 and 13, all students of all backgrounds. So she's just wondering about what should she be on the lookout for? What can we all be on the lookout for these things?
Okay, well, if she's a teacher, I have one of the things that I want to say. If you teach middle school kids, again, My Life, My Choice has a prevention curriculum, and we go into schools. We usually do 12 and up. We usually do, we don't really do that young, but it's hard to get us in school. So most schools that we've gotten into, someone attended something like this and was kind of, in a sense, able to sneak us in the back door.
Yeah.
And we got to run the groups. But the other thing I would suggest when we're talking children, to go on the My Life, My Choice website. We do commercial sexual exploitation of children trainings all the time. We do, we've converted them to do them on Zoom. And so what I would suggest is that you would go on our website. It's mylifefightingexploitation.org, My Life, My Choice. And you will see a list, you'll see our schedule for trainings. And so I would suggest that to anyone who's on this webinar who works with adolescent youth, as Amirah works with adults. So it's two separate things for adults, Amirah. But if you want education on better looking for the red flags and to identify victims, child victims of exploitation, because it's happened to some of the kids, believe me. And some people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to open a can of worms, but it's already open. So I would suggest that you do that. some of the red flags, they're missing from care, running away a lot, dealing with older kids, right? That older boyfriend, right? She's 13 and he's 21, like all that, those are all red flags. But I would suggest that you do, and because we have full day ones, but we also have like half days. So I know a lot of people are working from home. I think it's easier to do it on Zoom. So go on our website and we can give you, not just yourself, even if you have other teachers in your facility that need that. And it's the most affordable way to do it too, to join us on Zoom and get a full education on commercial sexual exploitation of children. So that's for anyone who's working with youth.
Thank you so much, Audrey.
Well, I just want to add to that too, for anyone who's like looking for, I think it's really easy to say like, what are the red flags? How do I look for the red flags? And it can be, at least in my experience, people have asked me for like a list of things. Mm-hmm. And I really want to emphasize the training that Audrey is offering, because it's not just a list of things. Mm-hmm. It's about understanding the psychology of it, what that girl is going through, because every single exploitation experience is different.
Yeah. That's right.
There's a lot of commonalities between them, but they're all different. And we have to honor that and respect that experience of that child or that woman. So if you're even thinking like, oh, I don't know if I want to spend a half a day talking about this, can you just give me a list? The list won't work.
No, it won't work. So nope.
We really want to emphasize that it's about understanding the experience, understanding the human experience. Remember, we can't just objectify them because they're victims either. They're humans and they're going to react that way.
Well, thank you both so much. I'm speaking for myself, but hopefully for all the participants, this has been eye-opening on so many different levels. And I'm hoping and I'm praying that people will leave not just like, okay, this just sucks even more, but like, we have so many things that we can be doing. Don't see it as there is too much that we cannot do. There's so many opportunities, so many ways to get involved, so many just wonderful things that you could start. You can post this webinar when we put it out there, invite more people to this conversation. This is the time to do this, guys. I'm so thrilled with where we are right now and where we are headed. I'm hopeful for where we're headed. So I want to encourage you all, as Audrey said, go to mylifemychoice.org. They have so many amazing resources. We've been trained by them. Our staff has been trained by them. They're amazing. They've been around for so long, and they are leaders here in Massachusetts, throughout New England and America. So we're grateful for Audrey for their work. Go to amirahinc.org. One of the best ways that you can support us right now is by moving for Amirah. The second full week of July, sign up for this amazing movement. Do some serious miles. I'm going to be running/walking 30 miles that week, which is a very big deal for me. And so I'm going to just encourage you, do something that week, because the reality is you're not going to be able to necessarily sit down for a cup of coffee with one of the survivors that's working through the trauma in our safe home, but you can support her still, and you can do it in a really meaningful, impactful way. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, Mary, for your time. This has been beautiful and wonderful. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your very humid, hot day here.
Yes. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Audrey.